Good evening, folks. I'm just going to give it another minute or so to let folk trickle in, but we'll be starting shortly. Okay, good evening, folks, and thank you very much for giving up your time this evening, particularly after the football, and should probably say a very warm welcome to any English fans out there of the football, and congratulations on that result. This is our second event that we're running to do with Caithness and Sutherland on behalf of Community Land Scotland. My name is Magnus Davidson. For those that don't know me, I'm a director with Community Land Scotland, and my day job is with UHI, looking actually at environmental issues. So I'm very looking forward to the discussion tonight. I'm just going to give one brief little kind of housekeeping warning that I've got two dogs in with me tonight. So as with all Zoom things, if you hear them barking or whatnot, I'll apologise in advance and try and shut them up. But I'm a lecturer as well, so I use slides for absolutely everything. But it's very much just to welcome everybody to our second event in the series. Tonight we're focusing on climate change and climate adaptation. Hopefully we'll also be discussing some issues related to biodiversity in there. We've got a fantastic range of speakers here who very kindly given up their time to talk through some of the work that they've been doing, either here in Caithness and Sutherland or some lessons from elsewhere. So we're welcoming Joan Lawrie from Thurso Community Development Trust, an organisation very close to my own heart. I'm based here in Thurso and sit as the trustee. Also Lucy Conway, who we welcome, representing the Isle of Eigg Heritage Trust. We've got Dr. Chris Dalglish from Inherit Institute talking through some work that they did on behalf of Community Land Scotland. And then we'll welcome Dr. Calum Macleod, our Policy Director at Community Land Scotland, to chair our Q&A. Just like to ask you to put any questions for the Q&A through the Q&A function of Zoom. Hopefully everybody kind of knows that by now. I should also actually say thanks very much to Amy, who's helping with the technical aspects behind the scenes tonight. If you're keen on social media, Twitter, whatever social media, in fact, we do have a hashtag, and it's hashtag CLS Far North. So feel free to use that to add to the discussion. And of course, we've got the comments function via Zoom to use as well. Just a little bit of background for those that don't know Community Land Scotland, and I'm going to keep this very short, and I'm going to keep it only to 2 slides. We're the representative body for Scotland's community landowners. We've got almost 100 members. I don't actually have the most up-to-date membership figures. Maybe we're beating that yet, hopefully. What we do is we represent community landowners in Scotland. We raise awareness of the benefits of community ownership. We support knowledge exchange and peer-to-peer learning, and we support community landowners. For anybody who wants to know more, I would very much recommend you going to our website, communitylandscotland.org.uk. A huge amount of incredibly valuable resources in there, particularly some of our policy documents. Why are we interested in the North Highlands here in Caithness and Sutherland? In particularly Sutherland, we had early success stories in the Northwest around Ascent, and we've had some success in community land ownership and more recent buyouts, particularly Garvalt and Dunnet Forest. But there's less community ownership land in Caithness and North Sutherland itself. Elsewhere in Scotland, I'm thinking particularly the Western Isles, but also increasingly the south of Scotland, we've seen success, showcasing success of higher levels of community ownership across all 3 pillars of sustainability: social, economic, and environmental. And hopefully we focus a bit on environmental tonight. There's also been a real renewed interest in community ownership in the far north against the backdrop of new green lairds, quite often absentee, further concentrating land ownership in the North Highlands, and also looking to opportunities arising from net zero, with communities wanting to take ownership of those benefits, particularly through the ownership of land. I'm going to give 3 examples from Caithness and Sutherland very quickly tonight to raise some discussion, hopefully going forward, particularly in the Q&A, so hopefully this raises some discussion. First of which is around lessons from renewable energy development in the area. The second is looking at a shift to net zero via the peatlands of Caithness and Sutherland. And the third is looking at community-owned land as a driver for just transition, utilising just transition principles. So a big focus of my work is based around renewables, and I like to use renewables as a lesson for what might happen in the future as we look to climate mitigation and adaptation in the region. So Highland produces over a quarter of Scotland's renewable electricity and over 400% of our own consumption. Caithness and Sutherland are home to 0.7% of Scotland's population, but over 8.8% of Scotland's onshore wind capacity. We have incredible renewable resources here, incredible renewable capacity, huge amount of onshore wind, hydro, the world's largest tidal stream array, Scotland's largest offshore wind farm. Caithness and Sutherland are a renewable powerhouse, yet there's next to no community energy development compared to neighbouring counties, again looking at Western Isles and Orkney on their map. And this is largely because of a lack of land, a lack of access to land, and the lack of control and lack of benefit that comes from that. Caithness and Sutherland should be a renewable powerhouse, yet we pay the highest prices of electricity in the UK with some of the highest rates of fuel poverty in the UK. We know from elsewhere in Scotland the benefits that arise from community-owned energy, yet here in Scotland's powerhouse, we don't have the same access to that community energy via the lack of community-owned land. In terms of Caithness and Sutherland, we're incredibly well known, hopefully increasingly well known, for our peatlands, the flow country. Caithness and Sutherland are going to be fundamental to net zero ambition in Scotland via carbon sequestration and biodiversity, both conservation and recovery. The scale and diversity of peatlands in Caithness and Sutherland make them unique in Europe and arguably the world, with the potential UNESCO World Heritage bid that's ongoing. However, we've seen large-scale land acquisition in the region, beginning with the environmental NGOs like RSPB and Plant Life in reaction to large-scale afforestation. Everybody should know the story here, but as a reaction to ongoing environmental degradation. We've also seen more relatively recent land acquisition via the likes of Wildland Limited, looking to rewild large proportions of Sutherland in particular, but further concentrating the ownership of the land. For communities to benefit to the greatest extent, and in this case from the peatlands, we need ownership of the land assets themselves. So communities in Caithness and Sutherland have over 200 years of the experience of lack of control and the environmental degradation that came from that via the likes of sheep, grouse, deer, and then the trees. My third look tonight is looking at community-owned land as a driver for just transition, particularly promoting just transition principles. And I've put the link or the reference at the bottom here for those who would like to know a bit more. The just transition principles I've listed here. Buen vivir is a South American concept around community environment and doing no harm. Aspects to meaningful work, self-determination, equitable redistribution of resources and power, regenerative ecological economies, culture and tradition, solidarity, and building what we need now. I know of no other land ownership model that offers the same benefits in terms of the just transition principles as community-owned land. They deliver on each and every one of these aims. Private landowners and environmental NGO ownership of the lands can deliver on some of them, but I don't think challenge community-owned land in this respect. So for me, it's adopting just transition principles and community-owned land doing that. So just to summarise my own little bit here, it's Caithness and Sutherland and wider Highland are integral to our current and future work to achieve net zero. A just transition offers the opportunity to tackle key social and economic challenges in Caithness and Sutherland via our environmental resource. And do we repeat the history of exploitation, or do we take ownership of our future? And future for me has very much come home over the last year with the birth of a new baby daughter. So everything that we were discussing now is feeling especially pertinent for myself. So with that, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, Joan Lawrie from Thurso Community Development Trust, and hear about some of the work that's been ongoing in Thurso, where I am actually based now. So Joan, I'll hand over to you if you're okay sharing your screen now.
Right, let me see if that's working. I'm going to do housekeeping similar to Magnus as well, and I have a Labrador that's sitting here waiting for treats, just to try and keep her silent while I'm talking. So I'm from Thurso Community Development Trust. We are, in terms of development trusts across Scotland, still relatively a new baby on the block. We're only 3 years old, the first year as a steering group, the last 2 years as a fully fledged development trust. So mainly in that first year of work, what we did was really looking at what the people of Thurso need. We formed as a development trust because there was a perceived sense of community apathy across Thurso, which may explain some of what Magnus is talking about in the lack of kind of community ownership in Caithness, is that we've been a relatively looked after county. In terms of Thurso, we've been a relatively looked after town. There's not a community group organisation that hasn't had money, that hasn't had support from Doonry, but Doonry is closing down and we need to start creating our own destiny, if you like. And it's up to the community. What the war cry was frequently in Thurso was somebody's got to do something about that. And actually the people who need to do something about Thurso is Thurso themselves. So when we formed, we take very much a place-based approach, and this will come into where we kind of sit in terms of climate and net zero. The first thing that we did when we formed as a development trust was we had 12 people who sat in a room who wanted to be on a steering group, who wanted to form this development trust. And they had lots of ideas as to what they wanted to do. Magnus is actually probably one of them. But it was ultimately up to the people of Thurso what we wanted. So we went out and we have done extensive community consultation. We did, first of all, the place standard consultation. All 14 questions of it, we had 1,200 responses. Turned out nobody had asked anybody what they wanted in Thurso for a very long time. Nobody had given anybody in Thurso the belief that we could do something for ourselves. Following that, we did significant other consultation in the, I don't like to ever use the term the hard to reach, because I don't believe that anybody within a community is hard to reach. I believe that it's usually us who are the hard to reach. But we did extensive consultation and amongst those who are experiencing inequalities. We've also done extensive consultation in terms of where people in the town sit in terms of their attitudes towards climate action and climate change. And I'll come on to where we are at the end for where we're going there. From all of that consultation work, we formed a 5-year strategic plan. We didn't anticipate that we would have a global pandemic in the middle of that strategic plan. What underlies the strategic plan is it's based on the views of the people of Thurso. It's based on what they think of their place. It's based on what their aspirations are, what they want to own as a community, what they want to do as a community, where they see the community going. But underneath all of it is embedded in it climate action. I'm great for using the graphic on the top right, which I've added my own little piece to, which is those 3 waves, which is COVID-19, Brexit, climate change as being the big one. But in between all of that, we've got Doonry closure, which definitely is going to impact on the town. We're experiencing depopulation. We can already start to see trends in depopulation. We see, in comparison to the town of Wick, which would be our nearest neighbour and our closest comparison, you can see that Wick, while it might show more areas of deprivation and more evidenced deprivation and inequalities, in Thurso there may not be as much evidenced deprivation, but there is a huge gulf between those who have and those who haven't. And so it's how we make things equitable across the town as well. So there's a huge element of both climate action to what we do, and because a lot of what you can do in terms of climate action also assists with social justice issues. So would help to reduce inequalities. Now, we don't have access to big land or anything like that. We're very much a town development trust. There may be that there's aspirations in terms of renewables investment, but we don't have access to the same kind of land as maybe some rural development trusts might have. So the way that we have worked things is that we have just taken that climate action and climate policy is embedded in everything that we do as an organisation. So we have a policy. We very much enact the policy on a daily basis. Even this last year, where we have done vast amounts of community support, when we launched into a shopping and prescription service for people, one of the conversations I had with trustees was, how are we going to deliver the shopping? Because we're going to have all this carbon emissions from going out and about with cars. And it was like, well, we've got an electric bike, we've got a trailer, can we do that? In the end, we supported over 500 people across the town. So it wasn't really anything that we could do, but we are looking to some of the things that we did under that service, under that community support service, making them permanent, such as a meals service, and that's an electric van. There's no halfway measures that we're going in with anything else. So the type of things that we do is we very much promote localism. We try to procure locally. We use no plastics in terms of cleaning products. Travelling to meetings, when we did used to travel to meetings, is by public transport, if at all possible. We embed reducing food waste, anything and everything that we can do, because what we're looking at really from the standpoint of where we sit as a town is we're trying to set an example to the rest of the town, and we're trying to invoke behavioural change. So these are a couple of the projects that we've done as well. So this is our community magazine. That is carbon offset when we print it. And this was one of the Sustrans cycle markers, which we've done up. So we kind of embed sort of active travel and work with other partners on active travel and encouraging that in the town. The main project that we've had so far, which is relevant to climate action and relevant to land, has been our Thurso Grows project, which has been extremely successful in 2 years. This is an actual aerial view of our community garden. It wasn't taken quite at the best time of year. He's going back to take it when it's sunnier days and there's more growing in there. But it gives it certainly shows the infrastructure that's gone into place with it. And that's been over a period really of 18 months that they've put in that. That was a completely redundant, previously it was a community garden space which had become completely overgrown. Thurso Grows was funded by the Climate Challenge Fund. It promotes community growing, but it also, we do communal eating, we do everything to do with food waste, so workshops, anything and everything to do with what you can make from recycled materials, so promoting that circular economy. And from that, as you'll see as I move on, it's launched us into other projects and other aspirations that we have. The other project that we have, which is very much in regards to climate action, is our shearing shed. So the aim of the shearing shed is to reduce food waste in the Thurso community. We take from local supermarkets, we take from seafood deliveries. It's a community larder. People can donate things. We are just about to start. We've hit a bit of a snag, obviously, with COVID times, that you couldn't take from local businesses, but we are about to now start to be able to do that. We promote meal planning through it. We promote anything and everything to do with food waste and minimising your food waste. By doing that, and this is exactly one of the projects that I mean by the more that we can do, that there's so much things that we can do in terms of climate action, which also have social justice at the heart of them. So the shearing shed is there. It is open to everybody. There is no referral needed. Anybody can use it. So anybody who's experiencing food insecurity, it helps them. But also it is there to minimise food waste. And there are a huge number of people from the community who use it, not just to because they're struggling. They're using it also so that there is no waste. And that's ultimately what the aim of it is. it completely destigmatizes anything to do with food insecurity, because you have so many different people who go backwards and forwards and use it. To date, I think we have saved, I think we're at something like 20 tons of food from going to landfill now. So it certainly has a huge impact. This was another little thing that we did. So this was relevant to Thurso Grows, where we, during COVID times, we took over our town square and completely planted it up with vegetables. The Highland Council, if anybody's familiar with Thurso, you know that there is a beautiful town square on the approach into Thurso. It's usually planted up with bedding plants, but Highland Council allowed us to have it because the flower supply had been cancelled. We completely planted it up with vegetables and basically taught the community, many members of the community, about where food actually comes from. We had kids in there who had no idea how a courgette grew, how a lettuce grew, and people were then just coming and taking things away. We are no longer growing vegetables in the town square, but we are about to have town centre planters all throughout the town, which we will be growing vegetables and fruit in. This is where we're heading to, and it's not the best of images. It's very much a before photo. So our Thurso Grows project has been really successful in a really short space of time. During COVID, we were offered by Highland Council if we would like to take a community asset transfer of the town centre, of the town greenhouses. So they're fairly extensive greenhouses. They have currently asbestos roofs, which is going very soon. But what we intend for this area is to completely refurbish it. We've secured the funding for it. The asset transfer will be complete in mid-July. And we are forming a social enterprise called Socially Growing. The greenhouses is the heart of it, but we are also going to have a zero waste refill shop in Thurso Town Centre. The aim of Socially Growing is to try growing your Mediterranean vegetables for supply to hotels, for us to take on plug plants that we can supply to other places throughout the Highlands and potentially through Scotland. We have huge ambitions for growth with it. But one of the main aims of it is about growing, but we want it to be a youth training facility. One of the things that we very much clearly have found in Thurso is in this gap between where we have those who have and those who haven't, particularly in terms of young men. There are a lot of young men who are being left behind, who are experiencing mental health issues, addiction issues, have no access into employability. So what we want to do is take those young men, the most difficult ones, and provide them with a very holistic training experience where they're supported in terms of their mental health and their addiction issues, but they are also given skills in growing, land management and climate action as well. What we have found in amongst those young men is I can tell some horrific stories about them, but I can also tell stories of young men who are incredibly resourceful, who go out and cut grass, who go poaching, who do all of these other things. So whilst they may be young men who are never going to work for an employer, if we take them on and we give them the skills and climate, land-based skills, then it may be possible that they can then go on and form their own enterprises. That's the aim of it. As I said, this is very much the before image at the moment, but we are about to start on the extensive refurbishments of it. The aspiration following that would be at some stage to have a community farm. Where we're going to at the moment is we obviously had that 5-year strategic plan and we embedded climate action into it. We haven't shouted from the rooftops about climate action, but we are now about to go back out and consult with the community again. And we are talking to them about how we reach a net zero Thurso. There is an aspiration that we try and become one of the first net zero towns in Scotland. Thurso has a nickname of the energy town because of its association to Dounreay. With all the work that we're doing in terms of behavioural change, we can see that there could be a fit for Thurso with this. But as in everything that we've done so far, we need to take our community with us on a journey. And so that starts with going out and talking to them about it and forming the action plans that we have from there. there are many other aspirations, but they all fit into this plan to have this net zero Thurso. And that's certainly where we're heading to, in terms of we're trying to secure a community hub, active travel, our shop space, our growing projects, and try and emphasise that behavioural change as well. Okay.
Joan, that was absolutely brilliant. You know, I've been involved with the Trust for a number of years now, and I've been privy to all this information for those years, and it still just blows me away, the work that is done by the Trust, by the amazing staff like yourself and the amazing volunteers that we've got. It just genuinely, as somebody who looks at community development as an academic subject, when you see it happening in your own community and you go down to the town square to pick up your lettuce on a Sunday, or you visit the community garden, it just brings it alive. So I just can't sing your praises enough, and thank you for that presentation. Absolutely brilliant, and really looking forward to hearing some more in the Q&A. Up next, we've got Lucy Conway from the Isle of Eigg Heritage Trust talking us through what has become one of Scotland's, if not Scotland's, should I say, how do I say this without kind of everybody else getting upset, one of Scotland's best examples of community-owned land, earliest examples as well. So no pressure, Lucy.
No, thank you very much for that, Magnus. Yeah, my name is Lucy Conway, and I live on the Isle of Eigg. And I used to be able to look at my screen and know how to do a screen share, and it's not going to play ball again. Where's it gone? No. Hold on a second. Well, tell you what, while I'm trying to find my presentation, which was there when we did the technical rerun, I'll tell you a bit about Eigg for those who don't know much about the island. We're a wee island. Oh, thank you. Look at that. Community Land Scotland is sorting me out. Eigg is a wee island 5 miles by 3. It's a mile off the northwest coast of Scotland, off Mallaig, just south of Skye. It was bought, it was in community ownership. It came into community ownership in 1997 when the 65 residents, as it was then, decided that they would take over the island from the private landowner at the time. Sorry, I'm just hesitating. I'm going to try again. Amy, could I just try again? Because otherwise I don't know that when I'm changing what's it? How about that? Can you all see that?
That's working for me now, Lucy. Looks good.
Excellent. Okay. Now I just need to work out how to get rid of this thing up here. There we go. Slideshow from the start. That's better. Look at that. So yes, so the Isle of Eigg was taken into community ownership in 1997 after many years of being in private ownership. At that point, there was about 65 people who lived on the island, and today we're about 110 people who live here year round. When this picture here was, I think this was about 5 years ago when we were celebrating the anniversary of of the buyout, and that we cracked it. Slogan has been one that's stayed with us for many years. But what I'm about to describe to you is more of a sort of our green journey that we've taken over the years since 1997, rather than the idea that we have cracked it and we've got everything sussed. So, oh dear me, there we go. In 1997, and indeed for several years after, the generator on the left-hand side was the way that Eigg generated its power. We're not connected to the mainland grid in any way, and so each house and each business had to be independently powered by its own generator. Some houses also had a battery and inverter system, but by and large, the quiet island of Eigg was far from quiet. As you walked across the island, you could hear thud, 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 as generators were running across the whole island. So in some ways, Eigg's journey to net carbon zero started with the community buyout, and one of the things that the islanders decided they wanted to do was to have 24-hour clean, reliable power. It took until 2008 for the Eigg electric grid to be created. And the picture on the right-hand side you're looking at is the illustration from the leaflet that we put together for our Big Green Challenge, the Nesta Big Green Challenge project that we took part in over a 2-year period from 2008 to 2010. So, and the Nesta Big Green Challenge was basically to find a community in the UK that could reduce their carbon emissions by the greatest amount by using innovative methods that involved the widest of part of the community and which could be replicated elsewhere. So at that point, when we started in 2008, we didn't have the Eigg electric grid, and over the 2 years that we took part in the Big Green Challenge, we developed the Eigg electric grid and a lot of other projects beside. So for those who don't know about what the grid includes, it has 4 turbines rather, of 6 kilowatts each. At the moment, we have 50 kilowatts of solar PV, and we have around 115 of hydropower. This one on the bottom right-hand side is our biggest hydro, which generates 100 kilowatts of power. The scheme was designed in order to provide people with 24-hour reliable power. So there's also we had to create a grid because none of the houses were joined up. So there's 11 kilometers of grid which was installed underground to join all the properties across the island to one another and to the transformers that take the power around the grid. There's also a control shed and a battery control system whereby if the energy isn't available from either the wind, the rain or the sun at any one point and demand is greater than what can be provided, there's a battery system that automatically kicks in, a diesel generator system that kicks in order to provide the island with power. On average, we roughly run at about 90% renewables in a year. Some years it can be higher than that if there's a lot of wind and sun and rain, and other years it can be a bit lower than that. But we're aiming to try and increase the amount of renewable power that we use at any one time. One of the things that we do have, which is unusual by comparison to elsewhere, is that each house is limited to 5 kilowatts use at any one time. So it means that the grid it was calculated so that people, if they use over 5 kilowatts at any one point, their house will switch off. And similarly with businesses, they have a 10 kilowatt limit. And this means that in theory, and indeed in practice, there's enough for everybody all the time. But as our community grows and more people start moving here, and as the move from fossil fuels to electricity grows, we're having to think about other ways of being able to generate more power. This was the leaflet that we put together for the Big Green Challenge in 2010. And this was the idea that we were trying to encourage other people to think the same way to think about themselves as an island, to think about the same way as we did. So if the idea that an island is a metaphor for the whole world, and if you can look after your own island, whether that be a street, a classroom, an office, a town, if everybody does that, then we're all collectively looking after our world. And I was reading the text in the leaflet just yesterday to see, what we did, what we said we were going to do, and what we're doing now. And while the in 10 years time section has lots of lofty ambitions about how green we were going to be, round about now, nevertheless the actual main text, which is about how we live today and what we learned from our past, and the basic things about being more efficient with what we do, where we get our food from, how do we move about, what about rubbish, they're all exactly the same now as they were then. So in that sense, our journey has been consistent along the route. This, in addition to our electricity, I also said that I would explain a little bit about how another energy source, but also how that sort of fits into a circular economy. This is part of the island which has our forestry, which is commercial forestry planted in the 1970s. And in 2019, after many years of planning, we harvested 3,000 tons of mostly Sitka spruce, not just Sitka, but mostly Sitka spruce from Eigg. we exported about 3/4 of it, and that export paid for the basically paid for the harvesting to happen. And the 25% that we retained means that the island has got about at that point 3 to 4 years worth of food fuel for all the properties that wanted to use it. And in the sort of top rightish hand corner, you can see the forestry shed where all the timber is processed into firewood, and also next door to it is a community nursery, which has grown up as part of that. So that was a huge project, and it was at that point it was one of the most exciting things that we felt we'd ever done, to see thousands and thousands of tons of logs go across the island, thanks to working with our good friends from Neudert. They helped us extract the wood and move it across the island onto barges down to Troon, and it was quite something. But what these pictures here sort of give you an idea of other, well, both the firewood there on the right hand side that we're producing, but also what else we're doing from the point of view of sort of from beginning to end on the wood front. So in the centre there, we've got a nursery which is now growing native trees from egg seed. And indeed, in the top right-hand corner, you can see one little tree there. It's one of 17,500 that were planted in January and February this year on Eigg as part of a new woodland scheme we're creating. The planks on the bottom are larch, which was extracted from the woodland, and on the left-hand side is elm, which was part of, in 2010, I think it was, and there was a huge storm which brought down a lot of trees in what's known as the man's wood. So we're just having them milled at the moment to create some rather beautiful wood for a project that I'll come to in a second. We're still carrying on in terms of development. Not satisfied with having just created an electricity grid. We're always looking at new things to do to encourage our population to grow and to thrive on Eigg. And the top right-hand corner, this is a picture that's gone in for our planning application to install a further 120 kilowatts of PV in order to meet demand, which is growing all the time, as I said, from the point of view of new houses being built, new people wanting to move here, and new businesses being started. The building in the bottom right-hand corner, that's our new Anne Lamrig Centre, which is in the far right of that, you can see the toilet and shower block, which is near completion. And then the main building will start this summer to be built. That's a £3 million project to provide new and enhanced office, shop, a cafe space, and various other sort of social and visitor facilities. And then we're also looking at increasing our housing stock. We have 10 social homes for social rent at the moment, and we've just taken over, purchased from the NHS, the old surgery, which is the building you can see on the left, which we're going to convert into a house and build a new house adjacent. And both of those houses are going to have different kinds of heating that we've never used before. They're both going to be electrically heated, one with an air source heat pump and one with storage heaters. Now, we've not had the opportunity to use either of those methods before, because our grid has not had enough electricity to be able to sustain householders using electricity to heat their homes or water. So again, this is the starting process of looking at, as we move on, how are we going to provide enough electricity to remove coal, to remove kerosene, to remove diesel, petrol from all of our community activities. This is what's known as a clean energy transition agenda, and we're working, the bottom part of it is we're working as part of a series with the other Scottish off-grid islands and with Neudert, so that's Fair Isle, Fula, and the Isles of Eigg, Brum, Muck and Canna. And they also have pulled together a clean transition agenda, which is looking at how to collectively we can all develop alternative fuels and new ways of generating electricity through renewables. Collectively, we're also looking at improving our building stock, learning from one another, training one another, really benefiting from our collective experience across all those off-grid islands, and looking at how we might improve our ferries and our maritime transport, and also our cars and tractors and other ways we get about on our various islands. Meanwhile, on Eigg, which is the top sort of section there, we're focusing on the ground stuff, which is really looking at how we can create more sustainable and efficient heating for our homes. Also looking at increasing the sort of circular economy idea around local food production, organic and inorganic waste. And those are sort of while they're not as big and sexy as creating huge amounts of electricity or cutting down thousands of tons of trees. This is really where the behavioural change happens, and where we work as a community to use the resources we have, which are our people and our natural resources, to be able to increase Egg's economy, both social and financial, but also to reduce our carbon emissions, so that we're working towards, ideally, we say carbon net zero by 2030, but that number I'm sure will move as time goes on. So that's the sort of plan that we're working on at the moment. And just because I can't resist showing you some pictures, the community orchard was planted in 2011 as part of our Big Green Challenge, and we now have an orchard full of the most amazing apple trees, pear trees, nut trees, and all sorts of other things, which is much loved and used by the whole community. There's the Isle of Eigg brewery, which managed to crowdfund £196,000 out of over 600 people last year, and is currently being built on site at the moment. There's an oyster farm, which we should have full-size oysters by if not this year, then next. Those are two. That's a private business, and just because I couldn't resist it, those are our children. That was the last day of school when they got to dress up their teacher, and so we have a variety of teachers being got the better of by our small, very intelligent children, and they essentially are the future. We're all about making Eigg thrive for them. It's their equity of opportunity that we're looking for, and the terms that you use, Magnus, about a just transition really rung very true for me. If any of what I've said is of any interest, and you want to find out more, then drop me an email, or have a look at our website, and I think that's it. Thank you.
Lucy, thank you so much for that. Just as always, an inspirational story, and shows, I think, what can be done as a community who have control of the land matures over time and brings on these new projects, and not just new projects, but expands, for example, on existing projects to deal with the successes of owning the land. So one example here being the increase in population, and I think the population doubled, if I look at my notes correctly, and dealing with the success of that in terms of increasing the renewable generation that's needed. So absolutely fantastic. I'm actually going to send my community energy students at UHI to rewatch this video next semester. So thank you very much. And again, really looking forward to the Q&A session to hopefully elaborate on some of those points next. Moving on to our next and last speaker, it's Chris Dalglish from Inherit Institute. And anybody who has listened to me give any presentations over the last couple of months has probably heard me refer to or post up a picture of a recent piece of work that Chris has done for Community Land Scotland, looking at community land owners' response to the climate emergency. So I'm incredibly looking forward, hopefully, to Chris elaborating on some of that work, and really looking forward to it, and we'll hand over to Chris.
Thanks, Magnus. Hi, everybody. I'll do my best to live up to that. Let me just try and share my screen. Okay. Well, those are two really wonderful kind of examples I think we've just heard, and if you just bear in mind what's just been said as I talk, it'll all make a lot more sense, because that's exactly the kind of thing that we were looking at, and yeah, you couldn't get two better examples, I don't think. So, hold on a second, excuse me. There we are. So what I'm going to talk about is some research that was commissioned by Community Land Scotland and that we undertook between December and February, together with Dr. Bobby Macaulay, who's now with the University of the Highlands and Islands. The basic question that we were looking at here was how are community owners addressing the climate emergency, and along with that, generating local community and wider public benefits. So what I'll try to do is just share with you some of the main findings from that research. You can find out more by looking at the report that we wrote, which is on the Community Land Scotland website, together with a short film that we produced and 6 case studies looking at individual community landowners and their story in this area. So we began with looking at how are community owners addressing the climate emergency? So what are people doing, just in a very practical sense? And in relation to that question, we found that looking across the whole of Scotland, I mean, community owners are active in every area of climate action that's identified in the Scottish Government's climate change plan and in the Government Climate Change Adaptation Programme. So in particular, I guess you could class the activities that community owners are involved in these 6, under these 6 headings. And we've heard about most of these already, I think, today. So generating renewable energy from wind, hydro and solar in particular, managing and restoring carbon sinks, so taking carbon out of the atmosphere through peatland management, through woodlands, through green spaces and so on. Reducing emissions from transport, so that's through reducing the need for people to travel through co-working spaces, for example, or encouraging green travel and active travel. Reducing emissions from buildings and waste, so that might be about the energy efficiency of buildings and use of energy within buildings. It might be about recycling and reuse. Reducing emissions related to food, so local food production, encouraging people to grow and access local food and reducing food miles. And then finally, helping people to adapt to the effects of climate change. So in some cases, that's kind of hard infrastructure like sea defences against coastal erosion, for example. But I think more importantly, we've already heard about this as well, it's about helping people to make changes in their lives now and in the future as change happens, much of which at this stage is perhaps unpredictable to us. So we could see plenty of examples of all these activities. And I think one thing to conclude just at this point before I move on is that community owners are clearly contributing in many of the same ways to addressing the climate emergency as others are, as private landowners are, environmental NGOs that own land, energy companies, public bodies, and so on. So the contribution is there across a whole range of areas, but that's not the end of the story. And moving on from there, we were interested to find out, is there anything distinctive about the contribution that community owners are making, which makes them stand out from others in how they're approaching climate action? And we found that there are certain things that are distinctive here. There's 4 main aspects to this, which are listed here on the screen, and I'll just talk a little bit about each of these. To take the first one, the approach you tend to see with community owners, and again, we've seen this already today, is a holistic one. So holistic in a number of senses. Firstly, community owners tend to be involved in more than one kind of climate action. So generating renewable energy, but also promoting active travel and local food growing and woodland plantation. So a whole range of different activities. We found that was quite common. So holistic in that sense, but also holistic in the sense that climate action is not separate from action on other priorities, priorities like addressing poverty, like these kind of social justice issues that we've heard about. So climate action and community benefits of other kinds are very much rolled together. That leads me on to the second point, which is when you look at the way community owners approach the climate emergency, they tend to be delivering multiple community and public benefits through what they do. And there's a number of reasons for that. I mean, firstly, any income that's generated, for instance, from renewables is reinvested in the community in a whole range of different ways with different benefits. Secondly, when community owners bring forward climate initiatives, they tend to do it in ways which give people in the community opportunities to learn, to get involved, and And that has benefits for education, for skills, for people's health and well-being, both in terms of physical health outdoors and social interaction and these kind of things as well. So they look for the opportunities for people to get involved and benefit. As I say, the climate action is often wrapped up as well with addressing other issues. So in rural areas, but also in urban areas, addressing things like poverty and deprivation and bringing new uses to vacant and derelict land through things like community gardens or creating new green spaces. So the net result of all that is that when community owners lead on climate action, it tends to promote community empowerment, community cohesion, and community confidence in ways that you just wouldn't get if somebody else is building the renewable energy, somebody else is planting the trees, and so on. Moving on to the third point, community owners demonstrate local leadership and enable behaviour change. Again, also been touched on today. This is important because reducing greenhouse gas emissions is not just about things like generating more renewable energy or absorbing and storing carbon through peatlands and woodlands. It's also about changing how we live, and I think we know this. The Scottish government, for example, estimates that 60% of the reduction in emissions that we need to see is going to have to come from societal change, not from technological fixes, if you like. So social change, behaviour change, culture change, and many people would say the community level is exactly the right level to work at if you want to bring about changes in people's norms, their behaviours, their ability to change the ways they live. So action to help change those behaviours at the local level and build people's resilience and the resilience of businesses and communities generally in the face of an uncertain future is fundamental to our sort of national and global response to climate change. And community owners are in a particularly good position to do this because they show local leadership. Again, we've heard about this, set an example through their own activities and operations, supporting individuals and businesses in the local area to act, and engaging with people in their local communities to explain, educate, encourage, support. That gives community owners a particular ability to help bring about behaviour change because they can bring people along and they can help make things happen. Communities are often seen as trusted organisations, as credible organisations within the local community because they're known to be working for community benefit. They often build up a track record of delivering for the community, so they're trusted and they're credible. That means people are more likely to engage in a way they wouldn't engage necessarily with a public body or another outside body. Community owners also tend to know how to communicate and have an ability to communicate with people in the local area that some outside agencies might struggle to achieve. So just to move on to the final point, community owners are well placed to lead at the local level on a just transition to net zero and a green recovery from COVID, which are now very much seen as going hand in hand. Scotland's approach to the climate emergency is based in these just transition principles, which include things like working through a social consensus. It's not just for government or for large companies to act. There needs to be engagement, collaboration with workers and trade unions, with communities, with NGOs and all kinds of other organisations. So social consensus, but also a need for the changes to bring about net zero to go hand in hand with creating a more fair and just society. So that's about decent work, it's about providing people with opportunities and to making sure the harms and benefits of this change are fairly distributed, particularly in the places where people are going to be affected most by the change, land use change, for example. So given all that, community owners are particularly well placed to lead on this kind of just transition, if you like. That's because community owners are subject to local democratic accountability in ways that other organisations are not. So they're accountable to local people. They're also compelled to act in ways that benefit local people. They're required to. That's just something they have to do. It's what they exist to do. So that combination of the things I've talked about, the sort of things of being able to engage with people and bring people along, but also the requirement to work for community benefit just makes them ideally placed to lead on this kind of thing. And as a result, what we see and through the research, what we saw when community owners lead on climate action, it tends to help to build these confident, cohesive, empowered communities who also have greater resilience so they can respond to whatever change comes over the hill. I'll just end by talking a little bit about the final piece of the research, as well as looking at what community owners are doing, the different types of action they're taking, and as well as looking about what makes that the approach that community owners have distinctive, what marks it out. We also asked the question of, well, what's the future potential, and particularly how might community owners be enabled to do more? And there's 3 points I'll just kind of raise here, and that might, I guess, come up in discussion further. The first one is about expanding community asset ownership. And I mean, when you look at community organizations, not community owners, but community organizations generally, I mean, it's clear that there's a huge amount of climate action going on and some really great work. But there is a difference that we looked at in the research when community organizations own assets. It's not a prerequisite to climate action, but it can really enable and facilitate in ways that a lack of ownership, it works differently. That's partly to do with finances, financial sustainability of the organization, the availability of resources with which to undertake these projects. But it's also about securing access to and control over land. For anything you want to do around climate action, or virtually anything, you need access to and control over land. And look, there are many ways to get, I suppose, some kind of control over land through leasing and so on, but ownership, and as we know, gives a different level of control, and it means the community can plan for the long term, can be ambitious, and can make things happen that they want to see happen. It says, well, that ownership brings with it a higher degree of accountability usually as well. So that degree of democratic accountability increases often when you are responsible for an asset like land. And that brings with it also, we tend to see a greater sense of responsibility within the community, or at least in sections of the community, a sense that they now have a much bigger responsibility to take care of the place, the land, and the community, and to work hard for that purpose. So asset ownership does have distinctive characteristics, we say, that sort of that help here. The second point about partnership and collaboration, while many community owners are starting their own initiatives and leading, many will know, of course, that networks, partnerships, and wider collaboration support are vital, and certainly helpful. The community owners that we spoke to through the research told us a number of things about this. Firstly, it seems to be a feeling that the public sector needs to be much more open when it comes to collaborating with community owners to achieve what are shared climate goals after all. And the second thing that we heard was that people are encouraged by a number of initiatives that are coming through right now, like regional land use partnerships and regional climate action hubs, which have the potential to provide more collaboration, but we'll see how they develop. So the final point, and I'll finish there, is around funding. This was presented to us by the people who took part in the research as the largest barrier to taking climate action. Clearly, there are lots of government funds that have been put in place to support communities in this, but we got lots of feedback about the failings of that funding, shall we say, and how it might be improved, which perhaps we can expand on later on. Thank you very much.
Chris, many thanks for that. As I say, it's a piece of research I know and reference in loads and loads over the last couple of months, and effectively came along and put in my hands the evidence base for the arguments that we've probably been making for a long while now. So incredibly useful piece of research, incredibly good piece of research. And thank you very much for undertaking it. I'll kind of round up just quickly before popping over to Calum for the Q&A, and just once again thank all three speakers for excellent presentations covering a broad range of subjects, from the practical experiences through to the research. Just absolutely fascinating. I think I said it earlier, I live and breathe this stuff, but it's still absolutely brilliant to sit on a Tuesday evening and to learn more about it. So you'll hear a little bit more from me at the very end of the evening, but right now I'll pass across to Dr. Calum Macleod, our Policy Director at Community Land Scotland, to chair the Q&A session. So thank you, Calum.
Thanks very much indeed, Magnus, and thank you as well to our three speakers for three absolutely fantastic presentations there. I'm sort of slumped back in my seat, just awestruck at the kind of energy and the range of activities that are happening in Thurso and have been happening in Eigg for many, many years. And also the work that Chris has done, and Bobby Macaulay on behalf of Community Land Scotland, through the research that he's outlined. We were, as an organisation, absolutely delighted to commission that piece of work. And as you've seen, it's delivered from our perspective. I think from the community land sector's perspective, some really important findings with regard to just the kind of the diversity and the wide range of activities that community landowners, both rural and urban, are undertaking with regard to addressing the climate emergency, and things that obviously are reflected as well in the work that is going on Eigg and indeed in Thurso. So yeah, we're now moving on to the Q&A and discussion element of the session. So if I could ask our presenters to show themselves again, if they don't mind, by turning their screens on, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. So we, as we've said before, we very much invite you to ask questions on anything that's come up in the presentations, or indeed anything that's occurring to you. Please use the Q&A function box to do that as we go through. I've got several questions that spring to mind for me that just have come through from the presentations themselves. I'm pleased as well to say that in time-honoured fashion, we have some questions that were prepared earlier, and thanks to the participants in the audience who sent their questions in earlier as well. We'll come to them hopefully as well as we go through the session itself. So we have until, I think, till 25 past 8 to talk through the issues and discuss some of the issues as well that have come through. So let's just move directly to that as we go through the session then. So first question that comes through, and this is from an anonymous attendee. How can we better raise the profile of what community landowners can do vis-a-vis other owners, such as NGOs and private owners? Seems clear they bring multiple benefits, but how widely is this known? Chris, you've done the research on this. Lucy and Joan, you're doing this kind of work directly. So how do we actually spread this message, this good news message, more widely throughout Scotland?
Shall I jump in first? I guess this was the purpose, or one of the purposes of doing the research, and why you guys commissioned it. I mean, to help with that effort of spreading the news more widely. I mean, firstly, to look systematically across the country to provide a sort of more rigorous understanding what's going on, which can then be shown to people and demonstrated. But the case studies are key as well, and that's, we looked at these case studies, and the 6 were published alongside the report, which are just stories of what people are really doing. And we tried to use as many examples in the research we could, because actually seeing what people are doing. So again, hearing today about the work in both cases is really important. So I think at our end, it was gathering, collating, making sense of information, and then putting that in a form. But then it's over to the likes of yourself, I guess, from there as to how you spread that more widely.
Well, indeed, and rest assured that the report and its findings have been spread far and wide in that sense, and I think I've received a good deal of very positive response in that regard. Joan, let me pass it over to you. Any thoughts on how do we sort of spread the word and just roll out this fantastic work that you are engaged in Thurso, and just the wide range of different activities that, as you've said in your presentation, intersect very clearly in terms of the relationship between climate justice and social justice, and so much beyond that as well. Your thoughts on that?
I'd say quite an element of shameless self-promotion. You've got to be aware as an organisation to put yourself out there, and certainly connect with people digitally that might not be within your community. But it is organisations like Community Land Scotland, Development Trust Association Scotland, being part of those kind of wider networks and getting things pushed further along on the agenda there. I'd certainly say that in terms of what's happened in the past 18 months, there seems to be much more of an appetite to know with what's going on within communities, and there's beginning to be this kind of redress of power, I think, over towards communities. Not enough yet, but I think it's beginning to happen.
Okay, I want to come back to that point, because I assume you're alluding to obviously the impacts of the pandemic and clearly the implications of that, which I think is obviously a very important dimension to all of this at the moment. And your 3-wave diagram, I think, is excellent in terms of that, but also the sort of localized element too with regard to Doonry. So I want to come back to that in a moment, but let me pass over to Lucy first and get your thoughts, Lucy, on how we actually spread the messages that are very, very important with regard to community ownership and addressing the climate emergency.
I mean, I sort of echo what Chris has said, really, which is about sort of, you know, spreading the news and also making it relevant in the context where the news is to be spread. I mean, we're very willing to share our experience, and it has been one over the last, you know, since the mid-90s, really, when the idea of community ownership first was mooted amongst the community. And the benefits that have happened have been incredible. I mean, our main problem is there is only 110 of us, and when you take the children off one end and the older people off the other end, who maybe deserve to get on with their lives rather than running a community enterprise, there's not a huge number of people in the middle left to manage the new developments and to share all the benefits and news with the wider world. So we're very much of a case of the spirit is willing, but sometimes we just literally, we cannot meet the demand for all the questions. We could build temples of theses that have been written about us, and visits we have hosted. So I think that from the point of view of you know, how we can spread the news, and I think that's where organisations like Community Land Scotland are so important, because they can take what they know of us and share that further afield and put it, as it in contexts that actually are relevant and work for people.
Yeah, no, indeed, and of course, thanks for that, and of course with Eigg, you have, as you've noted, had many journalists and researchers beating a path and going across the ferry to your door as well, of course, to learn from what you've been doing over there.
But also I think it's sort of the idea that people think that we've got there, that we're some kind of green nirvana, and that it's all marvelous. And by and large, you know, it's really good. But like everything in life, you know, there's still stuff we have to work on, and there's still places we want to get to. So it's a constant job.
Yeah, just to follow that up, because it follows sequentially in terms of the questions that we've got here in the Q&A box. And it's a specific question to yourself, but I'll throw it open more widely as well. And it kind of relates to what we've just been discussing. This is from another anonymous attendee, but and they say some of these projects seem very technical. They just want to ask you, Lucy, how you found that the right resources to help you on what has been a long journey, obviously over the decades, hasn't it?
Yeah, and the answer is a combination of external expertise, which we've managed to find through networking with other organisations, both governmental and non-governmental, over the years, whether it be in community development or energy generation or whatever. Over the years, we've absolutely benefited from external expertise, but also internal expertise. And as time's gone on and we've delivered more projects ourselves, we've realised that there are some things that we can do. So, for example, the harvesting project was a really good example of when we first started thinking about how we needed to extract what seemed to us a huge amount of timber, of 3,000 tonnes. And we started looking for external expertise to do that, and commercial companies to help us with it. They just kept falling by the wayside because we weren't big enough. But all those conversations meant that every conversation we had that went nowhere, we learned something new. And so in the end, our development manager said, "I think I can do this." And we went, "Yeah, I think you probably can." And so she pulled together, you know, a chain of people to work with, which I said included Neudart, and delivered a project which, you know, 3 years previously, we thought we were going to have to bring commercial expertise in, and we did it ourselves.
So you're able to actually have that in-house expertise and capacity that you build up from that, which is really important. Joan, what about you? You mentioned earlier on that it's important not to be backward in coming forward, but in terms of the kind of external sources of assistance or support and so on that you as a trust have engaged with as well, can you give us a sense of your experience in that regard?
I mean, the main one is obviously Development Trust Association Scotland. If there's something that we're planning, we go to them, we ask if somebody else has done it first, we get the information from there. But quite often, just kind of similar to Lucy as well, is sometimes you can just find it within your own community. It might just be a little bit of work that you need to be done, and so you go and speak very nicely to that person, always with the, if you don't ask, you don't get. But also, I mean, I'm very keen on skills development. I mean, I'm similar to Magnus, and I mean, he works for UHI. I'm educated via UHI in sustainable development, and it's about, I would love to see more people that work in community development. So every kind of step that we're going along, yes, we will take in external expertise where we need it. We will consult with other projects, but actually we're really trying to develop our own skills as well, because, you know, maybe more so across the North Highlands, I certainly see that there's a gap potentially in terms of development officers that have the skills and things like that. So we want to be able to develop those skills ourselves so we can help those other communities as well, and help other people to come on. Okay.
And to come back to the point that you raised earlier on, and I kind of alluded to as well, and that's the impact of the pandemic. What have been the main impacts in terms of your own? You outlined already in your presentation to some extent the kind of clearly the support roles that you've had within the community itself. But has the pandemic, its impacts, actually had an impact with regard to the climate-based activity that you're doing? Because as you've said, your strategy is very much kind of has climate action mainstreamed all the way through. And I just wonder, is there a kind of quite a clear relationship in terms of the two elements?
Yeah, there's, I mean, the main thing for us that happened as a result of COVID was, I mean, in March of last year, we immediately changed from an organisation that had all of these plans to we were immediately a social care organisation. And we, when you look at that 5-year strategic plan, which we'd written about 12 months before that, the main ambition that there was in it was for our organisation to become a community anchor for Thurso. And we didn't, that definitely accelerated. But so has the appetite within the community for us to do more things for ourselves, for us to embed localism, for, you know, that people are definitely wanting to take more climate action. I mean, the examples are Thurso Grows project was a 2-year funded project from Climate Challenge Fund. We got in there right at the end before Climate Challenge Fund has now changed. That first year that we ran it, where people were attending workshops and things like that in person, a hard struggle to try and get unique people in terms of and particularly didn't suit the way that funding operates. The second year, during a global pandemic, we increased numbers that were engaged in that project ×5, ×10, because people were suddenly interested in growing. People were interested in where their waste was going. There's definitely an appetite towards climate action and towards net zero across the community.
Yeah, that's really helpful to get that your sense on the ground in relation to that. Chris, with regard to the research that you and Bobby conducted, any thoughts there with regard to some of your findings from the research in terms of the links between climate action and some of the challenges that the pandemic has clearly visited upon us all?
Firstly, just to echo what you just said, Joan, I mean, just in terms of what we were hearing, if you like, standing back, looking across the whole country, about people saying very similar things in lots of different places in terms of, I guess it's made people very aware of the sort of need and the possibilities at the local level. So you've heard quite a number of folks talking, for instance, about consuming local produce became a big deal, right? So whether that's growing or whether it's in coastal areas, actually eating the stuff that's coming out of the sea, which would normally go off, you know, that's been more a Brexit thing, I suppose, in that context. But anyway, nonetheless, it just makes you aware of what you've got and therefore what you can do with that in terms of local production and consumption. So that's it seems like quite a common story across the last year or more. And I guess, does that combine with, I mean, and then from the government side, you've got this idea of a green recovery from COVID. So combining the kind of climate emergency issue with COVID, say, not just a recovery from COVID, but a green recovery. So how do we how do we change the way we do things coming back now? So I guess that all creates a moment where you've got all these levels kind of converging, but the question becomes, well, what happens with that? Do we actually make the changes we need? Is this opportunity taken up? So
absolutely. Okay, I'm going to move to another question, and I'll bring you all into it. This is a question from Rebecca Dundas. Caithness has a low population density, lots of land and relatively few people. What are the challenges in getting access to land and land assets? How do local community groups get access to and ownership of land to develop their own responses to climate change? And is this going to be need or demand led or opportunity led? And I'm going to go first to the most local, the only local resident in the area itself, and ask Joan, do you have any thoughts on what is a very large but very important question in terms of access to land to do things?
I think that, first of all, there needs to be a willingness on the behalf of communities to take ownership of land. So I think that there's both opportunity and demand that needs to happen. Magnus could probably actually answer a little bit better than me as to who the land is owned by across Caithness. There are sort of small scale development trusts emerging across Caithness and similar types of organisations, and it would be amazing to see them do more in terms of taking land ownership and taking a bit more control over our communities. Renewables tends to divide people in Caithness. We have a lot of renewable projects, which there are no, I mean, as Magnus said in his opening, there are no community-owned renewable projects. So there is a sense of being done to across Caithness. Yeah, I mean, I'm not completely sure the landscape of who owns the land. I think a lot of it is owned by the RSPB, which you know, that puts another element onto it, and it's protected land. But it would certainly be good to see more communities doing things. But I think that there has to be a demand from communities first, and I don't think that we're quite there yet.
Yeah, okay, that's really helpful to get your insight on that, Joan. Did Chris or indeed Lucy, do either if you want to make any even broad, not necessarily on the area itself particularly, but any particular broad comments on the question as a whole?
I mean, the community buyout on Eigg happened because of need. There was an absolutely unquestionable need for the people who lived here to have a different landlord than the failed private landlords of the past. And of course, we don't know what would happen if somebody else had bought the island, but at that point, the community who were here believed that there was no other way other than trying to take control of things themselves in order to secure a thriving future for them and their generations to follow on. And I think there's always a difference between need and opportunity. And I think that when whoever's looking at assets, be they land or physical buildings, to acquire on the community ownership basis, then that distinction between need and opportunity needs to be really, really clear in people's minds. And I think that as with the climate emergency, I think that the blurring of those lines between need and opportunity may becoming more. But I think nevertheless, people need to be really clear about why they're getting involved in the first place.
Absolutely, that's clearly very, very important in that whole journey and setting off on it. Chris, do you have any thoughts on the issue?
Just in general, I mean, not about Caithness as such, which I don't know particularly well, but it seems a case in point, doesn't it, of the sort of wider pattern of, you know, concentrated land ownership in a few hands and large areas in a few hands, these kind of monopolies of land ownership. So how do local communities get ownership and access? I mean, that's a general land reform question rather than a specific one over there, I guess. But all I wanted to say around it was, I think, again, just thinking back to the research that we've been talking about tonight, I think the key point comes out, if communities don't have access and some kind of control over that land, what do we lose? We lose all of those benefits and that the opportunity, you would arguably, to implement a just transition to net zero, because if the communities are not involved, by definition, it's very hard to see how that would be just. So it just underlines the problem and the issue, I suppose.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to move to some of our pre-submitted questions from participants as well. So let me turn to a question from Megan McInnes, who, as many people know, is amongst many other things, a commissioner with the Scottish Land Commission. Megan asks, should Scotland consider a system for recognising community rights to carbon and the sequestration services such rights would provide, as have admittedly a small number of other countries done? So let me open that to anyone on the panel who wants to jump in for a first comment on it. Form an orderly queue. So I suppose the breadth that this question is about, that, you know, broadening out the range of community rights with regard to, well, obviously the carbon dimension of that. We have community rights to buy, of course, but this would be, I think what Megan's suggesting, a slightly different, a quite different model that might be taken forward as well. So might there be some merits in that, or indeed not? I'm going to come to someone in a second. Chris, you've started.
Just to fill the silence, I can help myself, but it's not something. I mean, I don't know in terms of the question about sequestration. Right to carbon. So it's not something I'll claim to know anything about in terms of examples around the world or whatever. But it's an interesting idea, I think, because and does it take us away from ownership per se to just thinking these other, as you say, expanding community rights? Clearly, how communities benefit or don't benefit from the land use changes and we're seeing this kind of market for estates kind of building up, where people are seeing the opportunity to buy land and use that for carbon offsetting or for getting government investment and so on. Is this a way to make sure those benefits are spread more fairly? I mean, I don't know. It's an interesting idea, I think, though, but I don't know if anyone else in the audience or yourself, Calum,
is related to that, but slightly different. But Joan or Lucy, do you have any comments in relation to it? If not, we'll move on to that question.
Not really. I would be making something up, I'm afraid, unhelpfully.
No.
Just the point about that as well. I think again, it's probably why I made such a big deal of ownership in that presentation about asset ownership, and in the research we looked at this carefully because you get asked, well, why does a community have to own anything to do any of this stuff? And at one level, you don't. But in the way our system is now, the way things are in this country, if you don't have ownership, how can you secure these kind of benefits and these opportunities? So that's why this is an interesting idea, because does it create other options, if you like? But the way things are right now, I think that's why ownership becomes so key, because we don't have rights like this.
Oh, absolutely. A bit understood in terms of where the gaps are with regards to that. Conscious of time, and there are questions which we haven't had a chance to respond to, but we will send follow-up responses to any of the questions we haven't got through in the time that we've got. But I want to ask, and I'm going to take Chairman's prerogative here and just ask the last question myself as well. And it kind of relates to the question Megan asked. In this current session of Parliament, various political parties, the SNP in government, the Greens and Labour have all committed to a new land reform bill being passed. And part of the focus of that is likely to be on scale and concentration of land ownership, which is an issue in the Highlands and elsewhere in Scotland. Could each of you tell me one thing that you would like to see included in that bill that would be helpful from your perspectives, or Chris, independently from your perspective, to help communities actually engage more with the climate emergency and how they can address that clearly? One of the things that has been proposed by the Land Commission, and indeed was recommended as well by the Just Transition Commission, was having a public interest test on any land purchases of scale and or concentration, which seems very important given the significant heating up of the land market in Scotland, which is pretty much unregulated at the moment. So yeah, just any thoughts in terms of what you would potentially like to see in a land reform bill that would be helpful from your perspectives. And Lucy, I'm going to come to you first, because you've been involved in this area possibly for longer than others.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard for me to think beyond my shores, and we're talking about a very small area. And I think that the idea of the micro and what that contributes to the macro, and not forgetting that. And I think that when you think about land reform and Scotland Acts and so on, and this idea that it has a feeling of big broad brushstroke policy and legislation. And I think, again, if COVID has taught our society nothing else, it's talked about, it's made people think about what happens when you literally get dissolved down to your own backyard and no further than that. And I think that idea that small is beautiful, and that should be a major part of it, and that land reform isn't just about the large swathes of whatever. I mean, I'm aware I'm talking to people in Caithness and Sutherland, which is Eigg could fit in umpteen times. So I think there's something in there about respecting the small and the local, and particularly when we talk about looking at how, in terms of climate change, how we are going to be talking about heat generation, electricity generation, how that can be more effectively delivered at a local level.
Thanks very much indeed for that. Good point about the different scalar elements of this whole agenda. Absolutely. Joan, I'm going to come to you before I close. Any thoughts?
I think I mainly agree with Lucy there, actually, that it's about the small and the local, and also having a responsibility to the land as well. That local communities are respected in what's going on, that local communities are empowered to own more land, and that, there are more localized solutions to what community needs are.
Absolutely well said. We're going slightly over time. That's my fault, nobody else's, but I am going to draw the panel discussion to a close now. Thank you so much, all three of you, for your insights throughout your presentations, and indeed also through the panel discussion. And thanks to everybody as well who asked questions. Apologies for not getting through them all, but we will endeavour to do that in written form after the session. I'll hand back to Magnus then to close the session and reflect on that.
Once again, thank you so much to our panelists there, and Calum for chairing that so excellently. I've not seen a Q&A run so smoothly and so naturally for a good while, so many thanks there. A couple of takeaway points for me: never underestimate just what a development manager can get done, and I've seen that from various organisations I've been involved with, so all the power to the development managers. Also need to extend my apologies to Bobby Macaulay for not thanking him for helping with that piece of work, so say thank you again to Bobby. But yeah, I wasn't asked, and it's hard for me to sit with my camera off sometimes in these Q&As because I absolutely love them, and I wasn't asked, but I'm going to give you an answer, Calum, on that last question you asked, and it's around the public interest test. I've got a lot of faith in the potential of the public interest test, and I would love to see that robustly used post land reform bill. So that's my answer to the question. We're going to finish on time for once. So again, thanks to the panelists and the presenters for keeping to time. Thanks to Calum for keeping on time. Very much hope you've enjoyed this. We do have a third in our series coming up, and I have absolutely no idea when it is because we've changed the date. So we'll put that out over social media and create an Eventbrite. But yeah, thank you very much for coming along this evening. It's been fascinating, it's been insightful, and I've learned a huge deal, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much.